So Kant starts out the critique of pure reason by effectively pointing out that our reason is actually a gift and a curse. He states, "Our reason has the peculiar fate that with reference to one class of its knowledge, it is always troubled by questions which it cannot ignore, because they are prescribed by the very nature of reason itself, and which it cannot answer because they transcend the powers of human reason." And I think Kant describes kind of two pretty important things that he's going to try to do in the critique. One is kind of backward looking. I think he's really trying to rectify a mistake that's probably been going on for, 2,000 years at the point Kant is writing this, which is our reason is limited, and it's frankly not that powerful. So there are a lot of things that we really, really want to know as humans, but we just can't know them. And our reason in ourselves, we really want to know them, and because of that, we have really gone out on a lot of limbs. Like, we've really tried to figure them out and set a lot of opinions related to them, but there's effectively a line above which we cannot do anything with reason. And so kind of these really broad questions about existence and the existence of God, the existence of an afterlife, the nature of our experience and existence. There's just a lot of stuff that reason can't tell us. And philosophy and metaphysics in particular, Kant kind of describes it as a second-class subject, at least in relation to mathematics and science, because a lot of it is opinions, kind of wishy-washy, and people saying, I'm gonna tell you all these facts about experience, and this is the way it is. I'm gonna tell you all this shit about God, and this is the way it is. When really just talking about opinions, and math and science are talking about objective, verifiable facts. And so it's kind of easy to see why metaphysics might be relegated to be described as a speculative hobby, as opposed to like a serious academic science. And at least that's what Kant's kind of implying. But Kant doesn't like that. And, he kind of makes the point that we're always going to, even if we all agree we can't answer these questions, we're always going to want to, and we're always going to probably try. And I think that Kant is going to do, two things. He's often referred to in stuff that I've seen as the Great Destroyer. And effectively, he's going to say, everything above that line, like, I hate to break it to everybody, but we're not going to be able to do anything with reason related to a lot of those things. So on page 8 of the Preface, he states, "The duty of philosophy was to remove the deception which arose from false interpretation, even though many a prized, cherished dream should vanish at the same time." And I think he's making the point that it's really going to hurt, but we have to cut this off. Whatever reason cannot tell us, kind of as a matter of fact, that can't be disputed. He likes to use the word apodictic a lot. It's not worth worrying about that stuff or talking about that stuff anymore. And so what Kant is going to focus on is looking at precisely what reason actually can tell us. And there's two kind of main things that he focuses on, and that is the objects within the world. This is the transcendental aesthetic. So our experience in the world is one half of it, and the other half of it is our understanding. And I think one thing that I often, it should be present in my mind every second I'm reading Kant, but Kant is almost exclusively, from what I can tell, focused on figuring out exactly what we can tell about those two things, our experience and our understanding, a priori, so separate and apart from any experience. Because he believes if we can figure out what reason can tell us about those two things before we have any experience or without the aid of any experience, then that's kind of like, that's kind of the bedrock that metaphysics can start with. And from there, maybe we can do a lot of different things. But until we figure that out, we don't really know the limitations or, frankly, the opportunities that reason presents us. And so we're going to keep, asking a bunch of questions using reason, and eventually probably get over our skis and run into problems. And Kant kind of makes the point, and I may have already said this, but we're going to constantly do this because we're humans, even if we kind of recognize the issue. So it's important that we are very aware of this and that we kind of pin this down for future metaphysics. On page 8, I'm just going to quote it. He states, "It is, at the same time, a powerful appeal to reason to undertake anew the most difficult of its tasks, namely that of self-knowledge, and to institute a court of appeal which should protect reason and its rightful claims, but dismiss all groundless pretensions, and to do this not by means of despotic decrees, but according to eternal and unalterable laws of reason. This court of appeal is none other than the critique of pure reason itself." And so, kind of as I was saying, what Kant wants to do is look at reason itself and tell us, figure out exactly what reason is able to tell us about experience. And this is pure reason. So this is reason that is separate and apart from all experience. Kant goes on, "I do not mean by this a critique of books and systems, but of the faculty of reason in general, touching the whole class of knowledge, after which it may strive independently of all experience." And he goes on a few lines later to talk about the fact that he isn't giving up on reason, but he is trying to point out that at a certain point, reason becomes unhelpful and maybe actively discourages us from figuring things out. Quote, "I have not evaded its questions by pleading the incapacity of human reason, but rather I have specified them according to principles, and, after having discovered the point at which reason begins to misunderstand itself, resolved them to its complete satisfaction." Another thing, so Kant, a little bit later, this preface is only like 5 or 6 pages long, but there's just a lot packed into it. A little bit later talks about the fact that he is only interested in absolute certainty. And it kind of makes sense. If he is going to do what he has stated, he's kind of establishing first principles. And so he can't really just speculate on what these things are. He has to show that reason actually can and does do exactly what he's arguing it's doing, or else, I don't know, the whole system and theory might be compromised. So he states, page 9 of the Penguin Classics edition, "First, with regard to certainty, I've pronounced a verdict by saying that in this kind of inquiry it is no way permissible to propound mere opinions, and that anything even resembling a hypothesis is contraband, which must not be offered for sale at however low a price, but must be confiscated as soon as it is discovered. For all knowledge which is to hold a priori itself proclaims that it means to be taken as absolutely necessary, And so maybe I'm saying the same thing a bunch of different ways, but I think Kant's making the point here. If he establishes something that is true about experience or the understanding, separate and apart from experience, since it's not based on our experience and it's discovered through reason alone, it kind of has to be true. So otherwise, it wouldn't be a priori valid. It wouldn't be valid before we experience something. This may limit the possible universe of discoveries to a very small amount, but when you're searching for kind of first principles, it probably is going to happen. And then Kant, at the bottom of page 9, goes on to talk about the transcendental deduction and talks about the issues that he ran into. And to just maybe preview this issue, which I wish I had thought about it a little bit before I encountered it, because once I encountered it, I felt like I was too deep to really understand it, if that makes sense. But since Kant is like really dividing things into two separate buckets, these experience buckets, the experience bucket and the understanding bucket. So he first, in the objective experience bucket, it's important, I think, to kind of know ahead of time. Kant does not necessarily his views on whether or not we are able to know anything about objects or things in themselves or reality as it actually is are very much, I don't know, up for debate, from what I can tell. But on the other side of that, Kant definitely doesn't want to be a skeptic that thinks everything could just be an illusion that's we're not able to know anything about. Like, he doesn't want to be a skeptic. So he falls somewhere in the middle between those two things, but it's tough to figure out where, especially for me. But I think that Kant scholarship also kind of debates that pretty voluminously. But I think it's important to note he effectively, the way that I conceptualize it is, he effectively considers everything appearances, like how things appear before me. And they are not appearances in the sense that they are mere images that could be real or not real, but rather effectively how, I'm saying effectively a lot, how the world is presented to you is how I think about Kant's intuition and experience arguments. And so what he's trying to do is, again, I apologize if this is, if I'm repeating myself, but what he's trying to do is say, well, related to that experience, people have tried to do, frankly, I think his point would be, people have tried to figure out, is this a complete illusion? Can we know the Dr. Pepper can sitting in front of me as an object in itself and what it actually is? That's not really probably something reason can do. But what reason can do is potentially look at our experience and figure out what we can tell about it before we experience it. What are the fundamental, scaffolding? What is the fundamental scaffolding that makes up our experience of the world? And I think what he comes to the conclusion of is time and space are kind of the two building blocks that we know about before we even experience anything, and that are kind of required for experience, regardless of what it is we're experiencing. And then in the other bucket, we have the understanding. And again, I think it's important to kind of understand that Kant appears to be throwing everything into these two buckets, because, so just to talk briefly about the understanding is asking, well, what can we know in our minds about the concepts, like how we take in information and what we do with that as far as making judgments and all that other stuff. What can we know about that? Like, what is the basis of that that we can know about before we experience any of that? And so the experience bucket is the transcendental aesthetic, and the second bucket is the transcendental analytic. Because we're worried about judgments. I think that's right. I hope I have my terminology right. And then the issue comes up, if we're separating things so distinctly into these two buckets, how do we know that the concepts and the understanding and ideas we have actually apply to the experience that we're having? Maybe there's a possibility where the experience that we're having, we don't know it in and of itself. It could completely be an illusion. Kant isn't going to argue for either of those things. So, but if those things are possible, it could be that whatever our understanding, so whatever we think about our actual experience, it could not apply to it whatsoever. I could be seeing this Dr. Pepper can, and it could be who the fuck knows what. I could not be experiencing anything. There could be literally no relationship between what I'm experiencing and what I'm conceptualizing and thinking and understanding. And so I think this is what Kant is talking about when he talks about the problems of the transcendental deduction in the at the bottom of page 9 here. So he says, I know of no inquiries which are more important for exploring that faculty, which we call understanding, and for determining the rules and limits of its use, than those in the second chapter of my Transcendental Analytic, under the title of the deduction of pure concepts of the understanding. They have given me the greatest trouble, me as well, which I hope, however, has not been without reward. This inquiry, which rests on a rather deep foundation, has two sides. The one refers to the objects of the understanding, and is intended to show and explain the objective validity of its a priori concepts. So this is the sensation, objects in the world, experience, and trying to understand the validity of any a priori concepts that we can know related to that. It is therefore essential to my purposes. The other bucket is intended to inquire into the pure understanding itself, its possibility, and the powers of knowledge on which it rests, and therefore deals with its subjective aspect. And although this exposition is important for my principal purpose, it forms no essential part of it, because my principal problem is and remains this: what and how much can understanding and reason know independently of all experience, and not how is the faculty of thought itself possible? Alright, so I think something I didn't realize, Kant is really trying to nip in the bud this issue that I've described that comes up in the transcendental deduction. And that is, again, if our experience of the world and objects within the world are in one bucket, and that is completely distinct from our understanding in the other bucket, how are we able to think about anything? Like, how are we able to connect those two things? In other words, like, how is the faculty of thought itself possible in that system that Kant has set up? And I think, he appears to be punning on the issue and saying, that's not what I'm concerned with here. Don't expect me to answer it. Maybe he would take the position it's something we cannot answer, but rather he is going to focus on what we can know a priori, about the understanding, independent of all experience. Not whether, thinking and the understanding and concepts are actually possible to be validly applied to the objects within our world. Just to go back for a second. I've said a lot of different things. I think it's important for me. This is mostly for me and not for anybody else because I'm not a professor or anything. But I want to remind my future self listening to this. Kant is worried about reason, right? He's trying to do whatever he can with reason to help him understand metaphysics. He's trying to limit reason as much as he can to actually be useful. And what he's trying to do is address two things that he thinks effectively makes up our experience as humans. The first is our sensation, transcendental aesthetic, and the second is our understanding, so our mind, the transcendental analytic. And what he really wants to do is he wants to use reason itself to understand what can we know about both of those things prior to, separate and apart from, independent of all experience. And if we can know those things, then we can put metaphysics on the right track to actually be as indisputable and scientific as the math and the sciences and math that are Kant claims held in much higher regard than metaphysics at the time he's writing this. But by separating those two things so distinctly, it creates potential problems. In particular, which Kant is kind of previewing here, if they are so separate, how do we know that when they meet each other, that they meet each other in a coherent and intelligible way that we can hope to glean something from? Because if we can't, then I think Kant's entire experiment may be lost. But I don't think it is. So tune in next week to find out. But yeah, so these are my general thoughts about the preface. I apologize if it's rambling, and I apologize if I'm getting into stuff which I've already read, which doesn't make sense at this point. But this is kind of just... I'm viewing this as effectively what I would have liked to have been told. Not that anybody did a bad job or, didn't tell me certain things, or I'm not trying to denigrate any of the materials I've been consulting. But kind of an overview that I think would be helpful based on my very basic understanding of the critique of pure reason. Definitely open to anything I got wrong. I'm sure there's a lot I got wrong. A lot of this was just me trying to figure stuff out on the fly. This is way too long. I can't believe I talked for 22 minutes about a 5-page intro. There's some big stuff in here, but I do have concerns that my stamina will deplete rather quickly, and I will not be doing this for too long. But I hope to continue, and I hope this was helpful and semi-accurate. If anybody has any critiques or thoughts, happy to hear those. But otherwise, I'm going to keep going. We're going to go on to the B preface and hopefully do a shorter video, although it's longer and came later. So that's going to be what we're going to get into next. And yeah, hope to see everyone there and myself in the future.